Welcome to Course 1, Unit 3, Lesson 3, What is the Fed? In this lesson we have 4 lesson objectives. The first lesson objective is, what is the Fed? The second lesson objective is, what is the mission of the Fed? The third lesson objective is, how does the Fed change market conditions with interest rates? And the fourth lesson objective is, what does the Fed tell us about Mr. Market? So let's get started. Okay, so there's a lot of people that have no idea what the Fed really is. And the Fed is nothing but a short term for the United States Federal Reserve. What the Federal Reserve tries to do is manage the U.S. currency and ultimately control the U.S. economy. And the reason for the Fed, if you go back to prior to 1913, if you went around the United States, you'd have found 30,000 different currencies in circulation. Local governments could issue currency, state governments could issue currency. Pretty much anyone out there could issue whatever type of currency they wanted. And what you had was sometimes the currency would be completely worthless, sometimes it would actually hold its value. And this led to a lot of unrest throughout the country because there was no regulation or any standards for the rules for creating currency. And so after 1913, after the Federal Reserve was created, there was one federal currency, which was the dollar, and that in itself brought some stability to the country. And so that's really the reason that the Fed was created. Now there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of interesting things that you can read out there about the Federal Reserve, but that's their primary purpose, is to bring stability to the country. Now whether they're doing that or not, that's arguable, but that's the mission. So some of the stuff that a lot of people might find really amazing about the Fed is that it's a private institution. Although the directors are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Congress, once those people were in that position, they stay there for 12 years. And once they're in that position, they don't answer to the president, they don't answer to Congress, they are now their own entity. So after that nomination process takes place, the Fed, the people that are in there running it, are really, they can do anything they want. The Fed is a private institution, and it's owned by 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, commercial banks, foreign banks, and even individuals. Especially if you go back to the early, when the Fed was created, you had some very wealthy people that actually set all this up. And there's a very interesting book that's written on this. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island, which kind of gives you a different perspective on the Fed. It's a pretty interesting read. So where does the money come from that the Fed prints and puts out there? And some people are really surprised to know that the Fed actually has the ability to just simply print money from thin air. They can just print more money if they want, and that's what you saw in 2008, 2009, whenever they were pumping a lot of money into the system. They're printing that money and they're issuing it out in order to put more money into the system so people will spend it. Much of the Fed's activity is not made public, so they hold closed-door meetings where people cannot go in there and listen to it. All they know is after they came out, they get just a general idea of, hey, interest rates aren't going to rise or they will rise. And there's a lot of people out there that will even debate whether the Fed is even constitutional. But that's not really the point of this video. I just kind of highlighted these few things here to kind of throw out some intriguing facts that make you wonder, maybe you'll read some more up on it. But this is the 4 things that the Fed really tries to accomplish. They want to maximize employment and stabilize prices. They want to supervise and regulate banks. They want to maintain the stability of the financial system, and they're also there to service the debts for the U.S. federal government. So the thing that we're really going to focus on for this lesson, because it relates to the stocks and bonds and investing, is maintaining the stability of the financial system. So how does the Fed stabilize the financial system? If there's one thing that the Fed really understands, and trust me, there's some very smart people running the Fed, they understand this model right here really well. And this is the fear and greed model that we've been talking about in the 2 previous lessons. And here's Mr. Market. And as you can see there in 2006, 7, and 8, you had Mr. Market screaming for everybody to join in and to take the market higher. And the Federal Reserve knew that. They absolutely knew that there was a bubble coming in the economy, and they also knew that there was a recession that was going to be following it. And so they were trying to affect that. And the way that the Federal Reserve was trying to prevent that bubble from happening, where they were adjusting interest rates. And so whenever the market was climbing and getting really high, they were trying to raise the interest rate so that they could kind of slow it down. And then whenever it crashed, they were trying to lower interest rates in order to induce spending. So in order to understand this better, I'm going to give you a little example here. Okay, let's just say that it was Christmas time and you got a $5,000 bonus for your job. And you've always been wanting a new car, and you've been eyeing up the car there on the right. And so the question I'm going to ask here is, what is that car worth to you? Let's just assume that you had made an agreement with yourself that no matter what, you're not going to spend more than $35,000 on this car. So let's just say that the value for you for buying that car was $35,000. So you're going to use your $5,000 as a down payment on that new car that you can hopefully go out and buy for under $35,000. So let's look at what happens here when you go to the dealership and you show up and you look at the car price, and it's perfect. It's $30,000, which is under the amount that you wanted to pay. And I'm going to use a real extreme interest rate here just to kind of highlight and exemplify something for you. But let's assume that the best interest rate you could get on this car would be 15%. Okay, based off of that high interest rate, your monthly payment on that car for a 5-year loan would be $594 a month. And the total interest that you'd pay over that 5-year period would be $10,684. So the adjusted price on this car it's not a $30,000 car, it's actually a $40,684 car. And so because that price was higher than what you valued that car at, of being $35,000, you don't buy it because it's too expensive. That monthly payment's way too high. So let's look at this from a different angle. Let's say we still go back to the dealership and the price for the car is $30,000, but now this time the interest rate that you can get on the car is 1%. With the interest rate only being 1%, your monthly payment now is $427, and the total interest that you'd pay over a 5-year period is only $641. So now the adjusted price on this car is only $30,641, which is under the $35,000 that you felt the car was worth and that you were willing to spend, and therefore you buy the car. So let's look at this scenario side by side. We have the same car with the same market price, which was $30,000, but we have different interest rates, one being 15%, the other one being 1%, and so we got a different value at the end, and therefore different spending habits. In the one case you bought the car, and in the other case you didn't buy the car, even though the car was the same exact price. So those interest rates changed your spending habits. And so the Federal Reserve understands this. They understand that if they can adjust the interest rates, they can adjust your spending habits. And so if we look over here, this is Ben Bernanke, who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And so he's the head guy ultimately making the decisions on how the Federal Reserve is going to adjust the interest rates. And so when we look at our Dow Jones, we can see how the market was climbing and getting very high. And of course, Mr. Bernanke realized this. And so at this point, he was trying to raise interest rates. He was trying to make them fairly high. And if you remember from the first lesson, from Unit 2, Lesson 1 with the bonds, around this time, interest rates were around 5% back in the 2007 timeframe. And this was his attempt in order to slow this bubble that he knew was there. So we look at the mindset that he had, and we need to stop this bubble from happening. And the way that he does that is he raises those interest rates so borrowing money is expensive and people spend less, which slows down the economy, and hopefully the recession doesn't happen. But in this case, we actually had a very harsh recession, and after that happened, then the Federal Reserve's reaction is, okay, we need to stimulate the economy. We need people to spend money, so what do? They lower the interest rates because they need all that money to get out in the system, and they need people to start buying things so that the economy then grows again. So if there's one thing that the Federal Reserve knows, is that Mr. Market is wrong, and they're trying to counteract Mr. Market by adjusting those interest rates. So you can see here we have the Fed keeps raising interest rates. The Fed's pretty much telling you that you're in a greed cycle. When the Fed is lowering the interest rates, they're pretty much telling you that you're in a fear cycle. So the real question comes down to, which assets do you want to own and when? So in this scenario, let's look at the interest rates. When interest rates are really high, what type of asset do we want to be buying at this point? And the answer is that we want to be buying bonds. And the reason that you want to be buying bonds when interest rates are high is, for obvious reasons, you're going to have a coupon that's paying you a very high interest rate. And if you don't understand this part, you need to probably go back to Unit 2 or also Unit 1 in order to understand these principles that I'm talking about, so you understand what a coupon is and things like that. But when you buy a bond at a high interest rate, you're going to be receiving a very good coupon, which is going to be paying you a great return. And then the added bonus is whenever those interest rates drop in the future, which is going to happen eventually, when those interest rates drop, the market price of that bond is going to go up. And then you actually have the liquidity to sell it and put it into a stock, which is really the end goal, is to get that into a company. So now let's look at when interest rates are low. This is when you want to be buying stocks, because if you're in bonds, you got a really low coupon and you don't want to be doing that. But the stocks are very cheap at this point. They're undervalued. And so what you want to do is you want to go out and find a company with very low debt, positive earnings, and that has a strong price to book ratio, which we had talked about all throughout Unit 1. And you're going to get a very strong buy that has a really good intrinsic value, and you're going to end up making a lot of money on that whenever the market recovers. So how do you know what's considered a high or low interest rate? And this is really building up into what we're going to discuss all through Course 2, is that this is a relative comparison. What you're going to be doing in order to properly value a stock, or a bond for that matter, is that you're going to be constantly comparing the return that you expect to get with a stock versus the return that you expect to get with a bond. So let's assume that based off of the market price, let's just say we're kind of in a greed cycle. The stocks are trading really high, and so the best return that you could expect to get with the stock is maybe 5% based off of the high market price. But then when you look at a bond, let's assume that the bond is at 5.5% because of the market. So in this scenario, a bond has less risk, generally speaking, than a stock. And so this would be a very easy decision that you would want to be buying bonds because of the interest rates. And so by you being able to relatively compare a stock versus a bond, it's always going to put you on the right side of the fence, whether it's time to be buying stocks or whether it's time to be buying bonds. And that's truly the art of asset valuation. And we're going to get into this so much more into Course 2. And I really look forward to seeing you over in those lessons, because it's really going to start teaching you the important stuff that you really need to understand. So that concludes Course 1, Unit 3, Lesson 3, What is the Fed? And in this lesson we learned about what is the Fed, we learned what is the mission of the Fed, we learned how does the Fed change market conditions with interest rates, and finally we learned what does the Fed tell us about Mr. Market. And so I really enjoyed this first course. This completes Course 1. And I look forward to seeing you over into Course 2, where we're really going to start learning some of the important things for our intermediate lessons with bonds and stocks.